Traditionally, the MFP connector is used to scan physical documents and send them as faxes through Faxination. This is accomplished by monitoring the UNC path where the MFP is configured to write the outgoing faxes. In Faxination 2016, we've enhanced the MFP connector so that it can monitor multiple UNC paths, and each UNC path can have a unique application destination. The number of UNC paths that you can monitor is limited only by the capabilities of the MFP device itself, and any inbound capable Faxination application connector can be configured as the destination. On the Directories tab of the MFP Connector configurator, we can set the folder paths for general operation. The Backup directory is where the connector will store processed faxes when the backup option is enabled. The Config directory is used to store XML files of the MFP devices. The Error directory is used to store failed faxes. The Script directory stores the scripts that Faxination uses to interpret the data coming from specific makes and models of MFP devices. And the Unprocessed directory stores faxes that arrived from MFP devices that have been disabled in Faxination. The MFP connector licensing is based on the number of MFP devices that you can send from, so the Faxination administrator may disable certain MFPs to avoid licensing errors on the server. The Multifunctional Peripherals tab is where the MFP devices can be added, edited, and removed. We'll look at the configuration of a typical device. The name is a unique name used to identify this device in Faxination. The descriptor field can be used as a reference for the administrator. It is not used by Faxination. Select the type of device from a drop-down of supported devices. Configure a system address to use with host-to-host routing. Select the traditional scan-to-fax mode or the new scan-to-folder mode. And you can enable and disable this device without losing its configuration. This device is configured for scan-to-fax mode, so we'll explore that first. On the Properties tab, we specify the local or UNC path where the MFP device has been configured to deliver outgoing faxes. On the Notifications tab, you can choose to generate notifications for successful and unsuccessful faxes independently. And you also have the option to attach a copy of the fax to the notification. On the Options tab, you can choose to allow your end users to set the message priority and cover sheet at scan time when these options are available on the MFP device. You can set the default cover sheet to use for all faxes that originate from this MFP. And you can choose to retain backups of all scanned documents on the Faxination server. Note that this may be considered a security risk in sensitive environments. On the Identification tab, we can choose to allow anonymous users to send outgoing faxes without identifying themselves on the MFP device. And we can allow the use of PIN code authentication along with the PIN code length and the separator character to use between the PIN code and the outgoing fax number. When we receive the user identification in the XML data coming from the MFP, it's often not in a format that will allow us to send notifications back to that user. The Addresses tab can be used to map the MFP login information to an email address that the server can use to deliver notifications. The Network ID defines the pattern that will be used to map the user to the Faxination variables. That information can then be used to define the originator of the message so that their send permissions can be checked against the Faxination user database and their messages can be accurately logged. And when notifications are enabled, you can specify the host connector and address type and build the delivery and system addresses from the variables that were mapped from the network ID. Now we'll look at an MFP device that has been configured for host-to-host routing. This is the scan-to-folder mode. On the Properties tab, you define the local or UNC paths where the MFP will deliver scanned documents. Each path will be associated with a different inbound route, and you can create as many unique paths as your MFP device allows. On the Recipient tab, our example here defines a SharePoint document library as the destination of the scans. If the destination supports metadata, such as the columns in a SharePoint document library, you can populate those columns with information defined here. Here's an example from one of our recent marketing videos. This was a banking scenario for processing loan applications. The SharePoint document library destination has columns for the branch location, the bank representative that's working with the customer, and the representative's direct phone number. Each scanned document will pass all of this information to the SharePoint document library. As each new loan application is processed at the branch locations, they appear immediately in the Loan Applications document library in SharePoint, which triggers SharePoint workflow rules and begins the approval process. Each branch location and bank representative will scan into this document library with their own unique metadata. Most MFP devices will automatically name scan documents based on the date and time and scan sequence, but the file names can be specified at scan time when the MFP supports it. Remember, there is no Faxination software running on the MFP itself. Next, we'll discuss the Faxination MS Exchange Connector. It supports inbound and outbound fax and mobile messaging from Microsoft Outlook and other Exchange clients. It supports business fax contacts coming from the Outlook address book. It works with Exchange 2007 and later via Microsoft's Foreign Connector specification. But it does not work with Office 365, as Microsoft's multi-tenant Exchange model does not include Foreign Connector support. For integrations with Office 365, the Faxination SMTP stack is used, and that is discussed in detail later in this training. Beginning with Exchange 2007, Microsoft implemented support for third-party messaging systems like Faxination through the use of foreign connectors. An Exchange foreign connector defines a unique drop folder to transfer outbound messages to third-party messaging systems. A shared replay folder is used by all external systems to transfer messages inbound to Exchange. So there is a unique path that Faxination will monitor for new outbound messages coming from Exchange. When Faxination wants to route an inbound message or notification to an Exchange user, it will put it in the common replay folder for Exchange to pick up. When the Faxination service account has sufficient Exchange permissions, it can create the required Exchange foreign connector during installation. However, it's quite easy for an Exchange administrator to create a foreign connector through the Exchange management shell. To create a new foreign connector, enter new-foreign connector, gateway name, address spaces, address space, address, cost. It's best practice to avoid creating foreign connectors with names that include spaces or special characters. You can change the configuration of an existing foreign connector by replacing the word new with set. It's best practice to use double quotes around foreign connector names and address spaces in the Exchange management shell. To view information about a foreign connector, enter get-foreign connector. This will display information about all foreign connectors. If there is more than one foreign connector defined in your Exchange environment, which is rare, you can also specify the foreign connector name. For a verbose display of information, add the pipe symbol followed by format list or the abbreviation FL. Unless you're running a BlackBerry Enterprise server in your environment or a competing fax server product, the chances are that Faxination will be the only foreign connector configured in Exchange. The Exchange tab defines the paths to the drop and replay folders of the foreign connector. A drop directory is configured automatically when the Faxination MS Exchange connector is installed and the foreign connector is created. Multiple paths may be configured for redundancy or when you have a complex exchange environment with multiple hub transports. The replay folder paths are for messages going from Faxination to Exchange. Multiple replay paths may also be configured for redundancy. You must also configure the domain name of the Exchange Hub transport server where the gateway is installed. This value is used in the reply address of inbound messages. On the Notifications tab, we have all of the standard notification options that are common to all outbound capable Faxination host connectors. Unknown or unsupported objects in an email coming from Exchange can cause a message to fail. This is very rare, but we have seen it with messages originating from non-Outlook clients. Enabling this option will allow Faxination to ignore objects that it can't process and continue with the rest of the message. It is not enabled by default. On the Data Sources tab, we can set the credentials to use for LDAP and GC queries, such as X500 to email conversion, and the credentials to use for address book and public folder queries via web services. These fields are automatically populated with the Faxination service account information at install time. Although not a requirement, Microsoft Outlook and Exchange users are typically based in Active Directory, with their options and permissions stored in schema extensions. A Faxination MMC Snap-in is required to view and edit Faxination-specific information in Active Directory users and computers. You can find both 32 and 64-bit versions of this MMC Snap-in in the Fenestre MS Exchange Connector Install MMC folder of the Faxination server. The MMC Snap-in adds the Faxination and Fenestre Limits tabs to Active Directory users and computers. On the Faxination tab under Permissions, we find this user's permissions for both fax and mobile messaging. You can set the user's preferred format for inbound fax delivery. The PDF with OCR option is only viable when the optical character recognition module has been licensed, installed, and configured on the Faxination server. Faxination supports the use of custom mail templates or style sheets to use for incoming faxes. When this field is blank, the default style sheet is used. You may assign this user a specific cover sheet. Default.cs is used when this field is blank. You may set a charge code for this user. Charge codes are included in the Faxination log by default and can also be used with outbound service routing. This is a way of associating a user or a specific message with a department, a project, or an account that is independent of their normal account. If a user is configured with a CSID, it will be included in the page headers of all outbound faxes and override the CSID that is configured on the device service. And here the user may be permitted to override their default cover sheet, charge code, and CSID. Note that modern Outlook clients no longer have a message options dialog and therefore are unable to set per message cover sheet, charge code, and CSID information. Non-Outlook Exchange clients may still have this ability. On the Fenestre Limits tab, you can set messaging limits per user and per message type. In this example, the user is limited to 100 fax messages per day, but any quantity or interval can be specified, such as 10 messages per hour or 1,000 messages per month. You may also limit the user to a maximum number of split SMS messages originating from a single outbound SMS message. Note that the Fenestre Limits feature must be enabled globally before the per-user limits will be enforced. You can enable this feature within the Faxination Server configurator on the Traffic tab, and this will be covered later in the training.